They came as enemies, hardened soldiers who had fought across the scorching sands of North Africa, men who believed their nation stood at the peak of human civilization. They had been taught that America was weak, divided, a mongrel nation on the brink of collapse. Within 3 years, everything they knew would shatter. June 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The first trainload of German prisoners rolled into American territory, and the moment those boxcar doors swung open, reality hit them like a shockwave. These weren't just soldiers. They were veterans of Rommel's legendary Afrika Korps, captured after the devastating Axis collapse in Tunisia. Over 250,000 German and Italian troops had surrendered to Allied forces on May 13, 1943. The greatest mass surrender in Nazi Germany's history. What waited for them in America would destroy every lie they'd ever been told. The United States eventually held 371,683 German prisoners across its prison camp system. 371,000 witnesses. 371,000 men who would see with their own eyes the machine that was about to grind the Third Reich into dust. This is the story of how America won a war without firing a shot. Not the war in Europe, the war for the minds of an entire generation. The journey began in the chaos of North African ports, in Oran, in Casablanca, processing centers where the first cracks appeared in the Nazi worldview. German prisoners, accustomed to Wehrmacht efficiency at its finest, watched in stunned silence as American military personnel processed thousands of men per day with a precision that exceeded anything they'd witnessed in their own army. Medical examinations, identity documentation, Geneva Convention briefings, all conducted with mechanical efficiency. But it was the food that hit them first. After months of desert combat on starvation rations, after eating sand-contaminated bread and drinking water that tasted like rust, they were suddenly handed white bread. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute they'd choked down in the desert. Meat. Twice a day, some of them wept. They assumed it was propaganda, a show put on for the cameras, something to parade in front of the Red Cross. It had to be. No nation could feed its prisoners like this while fighting a global war. They were wrong. This was standard. This was what every American soldier ate. Every day. Without exception, the Atlantic crossing became their first real education. Liberty ships, those mass-produced cargo vessels that Nazi propaganda had mocked as disposable boxes, transported them westward. The Germans knew about the Robert E. Peary, that famous ship assembled in 4 days and 15 hours. They'd been told it was a propaganda stunt, smoke and mirrors. What they didn't know was that American shipyards were cranking out similar vessels in just 39 to 42 days, consistently, month after month, while German shipbuilding required half a year for comparable tonnage. During the 2-week crossing, prisoners watched American sailors throw away half-eaten meals, food that would have fed a German squad for 2 days, casually scraped into the ocean. The waste wasn't cruelty. It was abundance so complete that excess became invisible. The ships themselves told a story. Radar equipment, treated as standard issue on what were essentially cargo haulers, navigation systems that Nazi Germany considered experimental technology, used by merchant sailors like they were common tools. One prisoner, a former U-boat engineer, spent the entire crossing studying the ship's systems. Years later, he would say that voyage taught him more about American industrial capacity than any intelligence briefing ever could. Norfolk, Virginia, the first American port most prisoners saw, and what they saw redefined their understanding of scale. Norfolk Naval Base sprawled across 4,300 acres. 4,300 acres of simultaneous construction and repair operations. Prisoners counted dozens of warships in various stages of completion. Destroyers being fitted out. Battleships undergoing repairs. Submarines sliding down freshly built slipways. In a single day, they witnessed more naval activity than Germany's largest ports could manage in a month. One German officer, a naval architect before the war, stood at the port fence for hours, just watching. His hands gripped the chain link so tightly his knuckles turned white. When a guard asked if he was okay, he could only shake his head. No words came. He understood in that moment that Germany had already lost. The war would continue for 2 more years, but the outcome was no longer in question. The numbers didn't lie. Then came the trains. Not cattle cars. Not the cramped, filthy transport the Wehrmacht used for its own troops. Passenger coaches, with seats, dining facilities. Some trains even had sleeping berths. The prisoners sat in cushioned seats and watched America roll past their windows. Every small town blazed with electric lights. Not dim street lamps, brilliant illumination that turned night into day. Rural farmhouses, miles from any city, glowed with electricity. Barns lit up like factories. Parking lots filled with privately owned automobiles. In Germany, car ownership was a privilege of the elite. Here, factory workers drove to their shifts in their own vehicles. Factories operated around the clock, their parking lots full at midnight, workers streaming in and out across 3 shifts. Production never stopped. The machine never slept. One prisoner from a small Bavarian village pressed his face against the window for hours, watching the electric lights blur past. He had grown up reading by candlelight. His family's farm had no electricity, no running water, no telephone. Every American farm they passed had all 3. The camps shattered their final expectations. Over 500 camps spread across 46 states. Every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont. 175 main facilities and over 325 branch camps. Some housed 250 men. Others held 12,000. Construction time? 90 days. 3 months from bare ground to fully operational facility. Camp Hearn in Texas. Camp Shelby in Mississippi. Fort Robinson in Nebraska. The names blurred together, but the quality remained consistent. Wooden barracks with electric lights. Indoor plumbing. Heating systems that actually worked. Water treatment facilities. Electrical generation. Sewage systems that would have impressed many German municipalities. The camp hospitals were what broke many of the prisoners' remaining faith in Nazi propaganda. X-ray equipment. Surgical facilities. Pharmaceutical supplies that German military hospitals couldn't access. American medical personnel used penicillin freely, casually, as if it were aspirin. In Germany, penicillin was so rare it was reserved for only the most critical cases, if you could get it at all. Regular checkups. Dental care. Treatment for chronic conditions. The systematic approach to prisoner health exceeded what Germany provided its own soldiers. The kitchens revealed something even more profound. Industrial refrigeration units preserved fresh meat and vegetables. Electric mixers. Automated dishwashers. Gas ranges capable of feeding thousands, operating continuously without strain. Daily rations included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables in quantities. German civilians hadn't seen since before the war. Food waste was regulated. Kitchens had to prepare 10% extra to ensure adequate portions. That surplus, that mandatory excess, caused actual psychological distress among prisoners from a nation where rationing had become a way of life. By autumn 1943, American labor shortages forced a new development. Prisoners were put to work. This wasn't about exploitation. It was economic necessity. But for German prisoners, it became the most comprehensive destruction of Nazi ideology imaginable. They were sent to farms across the Midwest, and what they saw there rewrote their understanding of agriculture. Single farms in Iowa or Nebraska covered more land than entire German villages. One farmer, operating alone with machinery, could cultivate hundreds of acres, tractors, combines, equipment that turned agriculture from back-breaking labor into industrial process. Hybrid seed corn, developed through American agricultural research, yielded double what traditional varieties produced. Chemical fertilizers, which Germany desperately needed for explosives, were used freely on crops. Rural electrification had reached over 90% of American farms by 1943. In Germany, less than 20% had power. The productivity gap was staggering. American farmers achieved yields that left German agricultural experts speechless. One farmer, working with machinery, could accomplish what required dozens of German workers using traditional methods. Prisoners assigned to food processing facilities witnessed automation that seemed impossible. Canneries in California and New Jersey ran production lines that would have required hundreds of workers in Germany. Automated filling machines, electric conveyor systems, quality control procedures operating with skeleton crews. Yet production exceeded peacetime levels. Near Detroit, prisoners working in support roles observed the periphery of American manufacturing. They couldn't work directly on war production, but they could see it, and what they saw haunted them. The Detroit area alone contained more automotive production capacity than all of Germany combined. The Willow Run plant, visible from certain work sites, achieved peak production of one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes in April 1944. One complete bomber, every hour. The rate wasn't sustained throughout the war, but it demonstrated capabilities German aircraft manufacturers couldn't match for simple fighters. The electricity usage particularly stunned them. A single aluminum plant in Tennessee consumed more power than entire German cities. The Tennessee Valley Authority had harnessed rivers for power generation on a scale Germany never attempted. Hoover Dam alone generated more electricity than multiple German power plants combined. This electrical abundance enabled continuous production. Three-shift factory operations, a civilian lifestyle that consumed resources Germany reserved, exclusively for military purposes. Christmas, 1943, delivered perhaps the cruelest psychological blow. American religious and civic organizations sent packages to German prisoners, to enemies, to men whose nation was still actively fighting America. Churches organized Christmas services in German. Local communities donated food for special meals. Gifts arrived from strangers. This treatment of enemies revealed something more terrifying than any weapon. It revealed a supreme confidence. Only a nation absolutely certain of victory could afford such magnanimity toward defeated foes. The prisoners understood the message. America wasn't just winning. America had already won. This kindness wasn't weakness. It was power so overwhelming it could afford compassion. Educational opportunities exploded throughout the camp system. By early 1944, approximately 25,000 prisoners had completed formal courses. English language, American history, vocational training. Major American universities provided correspondence courses. Professors occasionally delivered lectures. Camp libraries contained thousands of books, including German language volumes and periodicals. Prisoners could read multiple newspapers, real newspapers with different viewpoints, criticizing the government openly. Press freedom that didn't exist in Nazi Germany, where every word served state propaganda. Camp newspapers, published by prisoners themselves, reflected the transformation occurring behind barbed wire. By 1945, prisoners published 135 different newspapers. Early editions carried defiant nationalism. But gradually, the tone shifted. Discussions turned toward post-war reconstruction, democratic governance, economic systems that created prosperity rather than just military power. The most significant publication, Der Ruf, The Call, was published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, and distributed nationwide to camps. Carefully edited by anti-Nazi prisoners, it gradually introduced democratic concepts, critical thinking about Germany's future, alternative visions of what their nation could become. The evolution of these publications provided documented evidence of ideological transformation. You could track it, issue by issue, watching as Nazi certainty dissolved into democratic possibility. June 6, 1944. D-Day. News of the invasion reached the camps within hours. Prisoners gathered around radios, listening in stunned silence as reports came through. Thousands of ships, aircraft darkening the sky, hundreds of thousands of troops. Days later, they watched newsreels. The vast armada, artificial harbors towed across the English Channel, supply systems sustaining the largest amphibious operation in human history. The organizational capability was beyond German comprehension. This wasn't just military power. This was industrial civilization mobilized for war. Prisoners realized their homeland faced not just military defeat, but complete industrial overwhelming. The numbers were incomprehensible. The logistics were impossible. Yet it was happening. Spring 1945 brought the war's end in Europe. American forces liberated Nazi concentration camps. The footage was shown to German prisoners. Many refused to believe it. Allied propaganda, they said. Lies designed to demonize Germany. It couldn't be real, but testimony kept coming. from American soldiers who had been there, from international observers, from letters arriving from Germany itself. The horror was real. The camps had existed. The atrocities had happened. This moral revelation completed the psychological transformation. Germany hadn't just lost militarily and industrially. The entire Nazi project was exposed as criminal, monstrous, indefensible. Everything they had fought for was built on mass murder. The statistics of the German POW experience reveal the program's scale and success. 371,683 German prisoners held in camps across 46 states from 1943 to 1946. Only 2,222 escape attempts. Less than 1% of prisoners. One prisoner, Georg Gärtner, escaped from Camp Deming, New Mexico on September 21, 1945 and remained at large for 40 years before voluntarily surrendering in 1985. Overall recapture rate exceeded 99%. No American civilians were harmed by escaped prisoners. The prisoners contributed significantly through their labor. They earned 80 cents per day. Businesses paid the government 45 cents per hour per laborer. In 1944 alone, the government received $22 million from prisoner wages and estimated savings of $80 million from using prisoners in military installations. A secret re-education program operated throughout the camps. The Special Projects Division, established under the Provost Marshal General's office, implemented sophisticated ideological reorientation. Historical assessments of its effectiveness remain mixed. 25,000 prisoners completed democracy courses through formal programs. But multiple sources confirm the program failed to change the views of the vast majority during the war itself. The program's approach evolved. Early efforts focused on exposing prisoners to American media and educational materials. Later phases incorporated structured coursework on democratic governance, free market economics, constitutional law. Selected anti-Nazi prisoners were trained as instructors and discussion leaders. Peer-to-peer education proved more effective than direct American instruction. Medical treatment demonstrated American resources and values simultaneously. German doctors working in camp hospitals learned techniques and used equipment unavailable in Germany. Mental health treatment, virtually unknown in the Wehrmacht, was provided to traumatized soldiers. Attempted suicides received counseling rather than punishment. This humanity toward enemies revealed strength through compassion rather than brutality. Camp medical facilities at places like Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and Camp Carson, Colorado, included fully equipped hospitals, surgical suites, X-ray departments, laboratories. German medical personnel worked alongside American staff, gaining experience with advanced treatments. Penicillin use, still experimental and scarce in Germany, was routine. Prisoners received dental care, eyeglasses, prosthetics, services many had never accessed as civilians. Religious life in the camps challenged Nazi anti-religious ideology. Chaplains conducted services in German. Local churches donated religious materials, occasionally performed for prisoners. Catholic and Protestant services were held regularly, with some camps reporting attendance rates exceeding 60%. Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi Germany sometimes served as translators and cultural intermediaries. Their presence forced prisoners to confront the human face of those their ideology had demonized. Transportation, infrastructure observed during transfers, and work details demonstrated integration on a continental scale. Railway networks moved vast quantities efficiently. Highway systems connected the nation. Pipeline networks distributed petroleum products. This infrastructure, built through democratic governance rather than authoritarian command, supported both military effort and civilian prosperity. Housing conditions for American workers, glimpsed during labor details, exceeded what German professionals enjoyed. Workers owned homes with electricity, running water, modern appliances. Their children attended free public schools. Medical care came through employer insurance. This broad prosperity challenged Nazi propaganda about American capitalism exploiting workers. Consumer culture revealed. Production for comfort rather than mere survival. Automobiles, radios, refrigerators, mass-produced. For ordinary citizens, this consumer abundance, achieved while fighting a global war, demonstrated productive capacity beyond German comprehension. Racial integration in military units and defense plants, while limited by 1940 standards, still exceeded Nazi ideology's rigid segregation. Prisoners observed African American soldiers and workers operating complex machinery, holding positions of responsibility. American racial problems were evident and serious, but the contrast with Nazi racial doctrine was stark. Some prisoners recorded their surprise at seeing African American sergeants commanding white troops, skilled black workers training white employees in factories. Scenes impossible under Nazi racial laws, the velocity of American innovation impressed technically minded prisoners. New machines regularly replaced functional equipment. Production methods continuously improved. German industry perfected existing systems. American industry constantly advanced. Quality control methods revolutionized German industrial thinking. Statistical sampling, tolerance specifications, systematic inspection, catching defects before they became problems. German craftsmanship relied on individual skill. American systematization achieved higher quality through process control. Women's roles in American war production challenged German gender concepts. Women operated machinery, supervised production, performed technical work. Rosie the Riveter was partly propaganda. But the reality of female industrial participation exceeded anything Germany attempted. Despite desperate labor shortages, prisoners observed women welding ship hulls, operating cranes, managing production lines. Roles. Nazi ideology deemed impossible for women to perform effectively. Credit systems demonstrated financial sophistication. Farmers borrowed for equipment that increased productivity. Workers bought homes with mortgages. Productive use of credit enabled economic growth Germany's conservative financial system couldn't match. Research and development efforts showed systematic innovation. American companies invested in future technologies while meeting current production demands. Forward-looking approach versus German focus on immediate military needs. Management techniques emphasized delegation and initiative. Lower-level managers made decisions that in Germany required senior approval. Distributed. Decision-making increased efficiency and developed leadership throughout. Organizations. Labor relations demonstrated productivity through cooperation. While unions were restricted during wartime, collective bargaining's basic framework remained. Workers participated in productivity improvements knowing they would share benefits. Safety practices prioritized worker protection. Guards on machinery, ventilation systems, protective equipment as standard. Investment in worker safety, even for prisoner labor, demonstrated valuing human capital beyond mere exploitation. Standardization enabled mass production efficiency. Screws, bolts, electrical components were interchangeable between manufacturers. German industry's lack of standardization hindered production, integration, and maintenance. Efficiency. The production statistics prisoners gradually learned painted a picture of overwhelming industrial superiority. The United States produced approximately 300,000 aircraft during the war, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, vast quantities of every military necessity while maintaining civilian consumption above pre-war levels. America launched more naval vessels in 1943 alone than Japan produced during the entire war. Shipyards turned out tonnage so fast that by autumn 1943, all Allied shipping sunk since 1939 had been replaced. These weren't propaganda figures. Prisoners could verify them through observation. Those who worked near ports counted ships. Those near aircraft plants watched bombers roll off assembly lines. Those in agricultural areas witnessed harvests that could feed nations. The evidence was inescapable, overwhelming, undeniable. Individual transformations among prisoners were remarkable. Officers who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler began planning democratic reconstruction. Committed Nazis fell silent when confronted with evidence of American industrial capacity. Several notable examples illustrate these transformations. Walter Hallstein, captured in June 1944 during the Battle of Cherbourg, was held at Camp Como, Mississippi. He organized a camp university where he taught law to fellow prisoners, participated in the U.S. re-education program, attended administrative school at Fort Getty, Rhode Island. After the war, Hallstein became the first president of the Commission of the European Economic Community from 1958 to 1967. He helped lay the foundations for what would become the European Union. The re-education program divided prisoners into three categories. Anti-Nazis, about 10%. Non-political prisoners, 75 to 80%. Committed Nazis, 10 to 15%. The strategy focused on the middle group, using anti-Nazi prisoners as instructors, isolating hardcore Nazis to prevent their influence. The program employed sophisticated psychological techniques, exposure to American media and literature, structured courses on American history and government, discussion groups led by anti-Nazi prisoners, vocational training emphasizing civilian skills, gradual introduction of information about Nazi atrocities. Effectiveness remains debated. A 1946 report by the Provost Marshal General's Office acknowledged the program failed to achieve fundamental change in the vast majority of prisoners. However, longer-term impacts may have been more significant. Many former prisoners later occupied positions in West German Reconstruction, where they implemented American-inspired methods. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, built upon groundwork laid through the POW experience. Former prisoners who had witnessed American methods became advocates for adopting these techniques during Reconstruction. They understood prosperity came through production rather than conquest. Democracy could generate wealth more effectively than authoritarianism. Treating workers as stakeholders produced better results than coercion. Former POWs became interpreters and facilitators for American advisors working in Germany. They translated not just language, but cultural concepts. Agricultural transformation that former POWs advocated was particularly significant. German agriculture had remained largely traditional. Small plots, animal power, limited mechanization. POWs who had worked on American farms returned advocating for land consolidation, mechanization, scientific farming methods. They had witnessed how American farmers with machinery could cultivate hundreds of acres, how scientific breeding and fertilization doubled yields, how rural electrification transformed farm productivity. Industrial methods. POWs observed found application in German Reconstruction. Quality control procedures, production line organization. Worker safety practices observed in American factories were implemented in rebuilt German industries. Former POWs introduced concepts like management by objective, distributed decision-making, worker participation in productivity improvements. The German economic miracle of the 1950s incorporated many American methods first observed by POWs. The psychological transformation went beyond observation of material abundance. Prisoners experienced fundamental worldview shift. They had been taught democracy meant chaos. Racial mixing meant weakness. Capitalism meant exploitation. Instead, they witnessed order arising from freedom, strength from diversity, prosperity from market economics. This cognitive dissonance created what psychologists would later term ideological collapse syndrome. Withdrawal from political discussions, rejection of previously held beliefs, eagerness to learn about alternative systems. Camp psychologists documented these changes. Even prisoners who maintained German patriotism abandoned Nazi ideology when confronted with contradictory evidence. The transformation wasn't universal or immediate. Many remained skeptical, attributing American prosperity to unique geographic advantages or temporary wartime conditions. But even skeptics couldn't deny the evidence of their own eyes. America's productive capacity far exceeded anything Nazi Germany had achieved or could achieve. Beyond formal programs, informal cultural exchange played crucial roles. Prisoners who worked on farms often ate meals with American families. Those employed in factories worked alongside American civilians. These human connections challenged Nazi propaganda more effectively than any formal program. Many Prisoners maintained correspondence with American families for decades. These relationships, beginning with simple kindness shown to enemy prisoners, evolved into lasting friendships. Reunions of former POWs and their American hosts in subsequent decades testified to profound human connections formed during captivity. The religious dimension deserves special attention. Nazi ideology had subordinated traditional Christian ethics to racial doctrine and state power. In American camps, prisoners encountered Christianity practiced without state control or ideological distortion. Local churches that ministered to prisoners demonstrated faith expressed through voluntary association and charitable action. Chapel attendance often exceeded that in German military units or civilian communities. Prisoners found in traditional Christian ethics an alternative to Nazi ideology. The post-war Christian democratic movement in Germany drew support from many former POWs who had rediscovered religious faith in American camps. Educational programs went beyond vocational training or political re-education. For many prisoners, especially those from working-class backgrounds with limited formal education, the camps provided unprecedented educational opportunities. They learned English, studied American literature, took correspondence courses from American universities, engaged in intellectual discussions impossible under Nazi censorship. This intellectual liberation was particularly important for younger prisoners whose education had been shaped entirely by Nazi ideology. Exposure to alternative ideas, critical thinking, open debate fundamentally changed their approach to knowledge and authority. The prisoners' exposure to American capitalism challenged Nazi economic doctrine. They had been taught capitalism meant exploitation. Workers suffered under corporate oppression. Economic democracy was impossible. Instead, they witnessed workers owning cars and homes, unions negotiating with management, broad prosperity achieved through market economics. This economic education was particularly important for Germany's post-war development. Former POWs understood market mechanisms, consumer credit, industrial relations from personal observation. The POW experience created a generation of Germans with first-hand knowledge of American society. Unlike negative stereotypes promoted by Nazi propaganda or superficial impressions of tourists, these men had lived and worked in America for years. They understood American strengths and weaknesses, capabilities and limitations. From direct experience, this knowledge proved invaluable during the Cold War. Former POWs who understood American power and intentions could counter Soviet propaganda about American imperialism. They knew from experience that American strength came not from conquest, but from production, not from oppression, but from freedom. Their testimony helped anchor West Germany firmly in the Atlantic Alliance. The documented figures remain impressive. 371,683 German POWs held in America at peak. 425,871 total Axis prisoners, including Italians and Japanese. 46 states hosted POW camps. 175 main camps with over 325 branch camps. 2,222 escape attempts. 25,000 prisoners completed formal democracy courses. 135 camp newspapers published. Construction of camps typically completed in 90 days. These figures represent one of the largest POW operations in history, executed while America simultaneously fought a global war on multiple fronts. The scale of the operation itself demonstrated American organizational capacity. The POW experience varied significantly by region. Prisoners in the agricultural Midwest witnessed mechanized farming and agricultural abundance. Those in the industrial Northeast observed manufacturing might and urban prosperity. Prisoners in the South encountered racial segregation that partially confirmed Nazi propaganda while simultaneously seeing African Americans in positions unthinkable under Nazi racial laws. Those in the West experienced the vastness of American resources and the dynamism of frontier development. These regional variations provided a comprehensive picture. Prisoners could not dismiss prosperity as limited to certain areas. From Maine to California, from Michigan to Texas, they witnessed abundance and industrial capacity that exceeded their homeland's capabilities. Professional German military officers experienced particular cognitive dissonance. They had been trained to believe in German military superiority, in the power of will over material, in quality over quantity. In America, they discovered quantity had a quality of its own. Material abundance enabled tactical flexibility. Democratic armies could match authoritarian forces in discipline and effectiveness. These professional soldiers studied American military organization, logistics, doctrine. They observed how civilian expertise was integrated into military planning, how industrial capacity translated into military power, how democratic oversight enhanced rather than hindered military effectiveness. This knowledge influenced development of the Bundeswehr, West Germany's post-war military, which adopted many American organizational concepts. Technological knowledge gained by POWs extended beyond specific techniques to encompass approaches to innovation itself. They observed how Americans constantly sought improvement, how new technologies were rapidly adopted, how innovation was rewarded rather than suppressed. Prisoners with technical backgrounds documented assembly line techniques, statistical quality control methods, preventive maintenance schedules. This technical knowledge brought back to Germany influenced industrial reconstruction and helped German industry regain competitiveness. The transformation of German POWs had generational consequences. These men returned not just as individuals, but as fathers, teachers, community leaders. They raised children with different values than those promoted by Nazi ideology. They taught skepticism of propaganda, appreciation for democracy, respect for human dignity regardless of race or nationality. Children of former POWs grew up hearing stories of American abundance and kindness rather than Nazi propaganda, about American weakness and decadence. This generational transmission of experience helped create pro-American sentiment that characterized West Germany during the Cold War. The 1985 reunion in Austin, Texas, brought together over 500 former prisoners. These men returned not as former enemies, but as friends, bringing their families to see where their transformation had begun. At these reunions, former POWs testified to profound impact. They spoke of arriving as Nazi soldiers and departing as democratic citizens. They credited American kindness with showing them alternatives to hatred and violence. They expressed gratitude for treatment that exceeded what their own government had provided, for education that prepared them for peaceful reconstruction rather than continued conflict. Historians have debated effectiveness and impact. Some argue the re-education program had limited immediate effect. Others contend long-term impact was profound, creating a generation of Germans receptive to democratic values and American alliance. Evidence suggests both perspectives contain truth. The formal re-education program had limited immediate impact on committed Nazis or apolitical prisoners focused on survival. However, the broader experience of American society created lasting impressions that influenced post-war German development. Recent scholarship emphasizes unintended consequences. While American authorities focused on formal re-education, the most powerful influences came from informal observations and experiences. The transformation occurred not through propaganda, but through exposure to reality. The reality of American productive capacity, democratic functionality, human decency toward enemies. The German POW experience in America offers lessons for contemporary conflicts and reconstruction efforts. Ideological transformation occurs more effectively through example than exhortation. Treating enemies with dignity can convert them to allies. Exposure to prosperity and freedom can undermine authoritarian ideology more effectively than military defeat alone. The program's success came not from sophisticated psychological manipulation, but from simple exposure to American society, functioning normally. The most powerful argument against Nazi ideology was not propaganda, but prosperity. Not rhetoric, but reality. This lesson remains relevant. Democratic society's greatest weapon is their own success. The German POW experience represents one of history's most successful examples of transformation through exposure to reality. Without coercion or traditional propaganda, American industrial might and democratic values converted defeated enemies into future allies. The prisoners arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness. They departed understanding that American industrial democracy represented a more advanced civilization, one that had defeated not just German armies, but the entire ideological foundation of Nazism. 371,683 German prisoners passed through American camps between 1943 and 1946. They witnessed the arsenal of democracy at its absolute peak. They saw farmers producing food for the world, workers building the tools of victory, citizens treating enemies with dignity. They learned that America's true weapon was not its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation. The transformation was neither universal nor immediate. Some prisoners remained skeptical. Others clung to remnants of Nazi ideology. Many focused simply on survival and return. However, the cumulative impact was undeniable. A generation of Germans returned home with first-hand knowledge of American power and prosperity, of democratic functionality and market economics, of religious freedom and human dignity. These men became unwitting ambassadors of democracy, carrying back to their homeland seeds of transformation that would bloom into one of history's most successful reconstructions. They implemented American agricultural methods, industrial techniques, management practices. They advocated for democracy, market economics, Atlantic Alliance. They raised children with values shaped by American experience rather than Nazi ideology. The economic miracle that transformed West Germany in the 1950s drew heavily on knowledge gained in American prison camps. Former POWs who had witnessed American methods became architects of German reconstruction. They knew prosperity came from production rather than conquest. Democracy could generate wealth more effectively than authoritarianism. Treating workers as stakeholders produced better results than coercion. The Atlantic Alliance that anchored Western security during the Cold War, built upon understanding, developed in American prison camps. Former prisoners who had experienced American power and generosity became advocates for German-American partnership. They could testify from personal experience that American strength served defensive rather than aggressive purposes, that American prosperity benefited allies rather than exploiting them. The story of German POWs in America ultimately demonstrates the power of truth over propaganda, of reality over ideology, of example over exhortation. These men were converted not by clever arguments, but by overwhelming evidence. Every electric light, every automobile, every full meal argued against Nazi ideology more effectively than any propaganda could achieve. The German prisoners had expected to find a weak, divided nation on the verge of collapse. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus of unlimited power and surprising humanity. They witnessed agricultural abundance that could feed nations, industrial capacity that could arm the world, democratic prosperity that exceeded aristocratic privilege. They experienced kindness from enemies that their own government had never shown them. In their transformation lay the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption, the final defeat of the Nazi dream. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to what free societies could achieve. Their children would grow up in a democratic Germany allied with the United States, a partnership built on transformation that began when veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped off a train in Texas in June 1943 and discovered that everything they had believed was wrong. The legacy extends beyond individual transformation or bilateral relations. It demonstrates that the most powerful weapon in democracy's arsenal is not military might, but the simple overwhelming evidence of a free society's capacity to create abundance while maintaining human dignity. The German soldiers who witnessed American industrial might were not just stunned by it, they were fundamentally changed by it. Their story stands as testament to a profound truth. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration. Not through conquest, but through conversion. Not through hatred, but through humanity. The German POWs were stunned by American industrial might, but ultimately they were transformed by it. and in that transformation lay the foundation for a better world. One built on the recognition that free peoples working together could achieve more than authoritarian powers could ever imagine. The German POW experience in America was not just a footnote to World War II, it was a crucial chapter in the transformation of the 20th century. It proved that enemies could become allies, that warriors could become builders, that witnesses to democracy's success could become its most effective advocates. In the end, that transformation achieved not through force, but through example may have been America's greatest victory of all.